At 6:11 a.m., my phone auto-synced his messages and I watched him type, "Morning boss," to a woman who wasn't his boss. The morning had the kind of quiet that behaves like a promise, coffee blooming in the French press, the heater clicking awake in the vents, the street outside still blue with sleep, and I was half reading an article about interface friction when my smartwatch buzzed twice and handed me a preview I wasn't meant to see. iCloud, generous and unbothered by human boundaries, had decided the night before to repair a wobbly connection between our devices, and now my Messages app filled itself like a glass under a tap, threads marching in with their neat gray icons and their curated lies. One in particular stopped me with the kind of full-body stillness I associate with car brakes in winter. A thread labeled "Boss." Pinned to the top, the most recent message, a small, absurdly courteous lowercase "morning," followed by a winking face that didn't belong in any chain of command I respected. I am a product researcher, which means my job is to tell the truth about how people actually behave when they meet our designs. And at 6:11 a.m., I felt both halves of myself split along a seam, wife, researcher, and land on opposite sides of the breakfast island. The wife felt the pinch of humiliation hook into bone, the slow bloom of heat that begins in the throat when you realize the stage you thought was your kitchen has been rented out for someone else's rehearsal. The researcher clocked the alias like a dark pattern, a UI trick that exploits what the eye expects to see, an affordance that hides in plain sight and begs for a usability test. He had chosen boss because people look at it and look away, because it says nothing to worry about in a language built out of corporate fatigue. The breadcrumbs had been accumulating like lint even before the thread announced itself. There were the late-night fire drills that wobble into the calendar at hours when emergency becomes a performance, the cash withdrawals that never wore a story you could launder in the light, the new cologne that didn't match the one I gave him at Christmas but matched the high-gloss ad for a brand that promises its wearers other lives. I told myself it was the season, the launch, the temporary chaos that every American job pretends is noble, but the body keeps its own ledger, and mine had been tallying. I opened photos to escape, which is what people do, and instead fell straight through a trapdoor. Apple, with its benevolent little secrets, keeps live photos as tiny time capsules, motion glued to a still, a sliver of audio humming beneath the frame. And a picture from our kitchen at 10:37 p.m. last week opened with the sound of glasses settling and a whisper that didn't belong to either of us. The still image was ordinary, his hand near the fruit bowl, the edge of my laptop, the lemon I had forgotten to put away. But under it, too, voices threaded themselves together like a conspiracy. "Deleted after," a woman breathed, and then his voice, lower and brighter than the one he uses with me, answered, "I saved you as boss." I felt the tiny hairs on my arms rise, not out of fear, but out of recognition. I was listening to a usability test for my life, and the users had found a workaround. The motif wrote itself without my permission. Live photos as evidence, metadata as witness, the unplanned symphony of ambient sound, ice, shoes, muffled laughter, serving as corroboration when memory tries to be kind. I exported the clip, duplicating it to a locked folder, and then emailing it to myself with a subject line only I would understand. I watched the file attach itself and leave the outbox like a small, determined bird, and I imagined it finding its way to a server farm in some nameless state, where it would sleep until I needed it to testify. Jenna, our neighbor with the flawless bun and the CrossFit tank that says hustle, chose that moment to text me a cheerful good morning that wore a second face. She asked whether I wanted to join the 7 a.m. class, whether I was doing okay, whether I had heard that the gym was adding a Friday wine happy hour for members and Mart friends, and I could feel her attention grazing my house the way a cat dabs at a closed door. Jenna is friendly in the way of cul-de-sacs and mutual fences, a woman who brings banana bread and gathers details, and she is also in his CrossFit circle, which means she knows what his wrists can lift and what he says when he thinks the conversation is a safe room. I typed back that I had deadlines, that I hoped her front squat PR held, that I'd see her at the HOA meeting, and I set the phone down as if it were hot. I drew a line on a sticky note and labeled the columns the way I do at work. Observation, hypothesis, test. Observation. Alias, boss, sending warm texts before sunrise. Hypothesis, Romantic or boundary-crossing relationship disguised as authority? Test, triangulate with metadata. The act of making a chart calmed me because charts don't lie, and the morning, which had begun with a metaphorical broken dam, began to look like a project. I tapped the live photo again and scrubbed the audio backward with 2 fingers, hunting for proof beyond the breathy choreography. The methodical part of me marked the background sounds I'd want later, our fridge hum, the click of the vent, the hollow echo of our slab countertop, while the hurt part just wanted a name, any name, to pour the ache into. On the second pass, a shiver of consonants broke free from the whisper, a shape inside the sound that didn't fit until it did, and then it was as clear as a candle in a closet, an intimacy so casual it felt like theft. She said my name. The frame shows a smile, the audio confesses a plan. I learned in the soft brutality of that week that live photos are tiny traps disguised as memories, each one a still image stitched to about 1.5 seconds of motion and sound, the way a secret gets stitched to a compliment. In plain English, when you hold your finger on a photo, the picture wakes up. You hear what the lens heard just before and after the shutter clicked. A glass set down, a laugh that didn't make the still, a sentence that thought it would never be caught. I duplicated the kitchen image into a locked album, exported the clip as video so no update could smother it, and ran the audio through a basic transcription app I use for interviews. The waveform unrolled like a heart monitor. The text appeared, hesitant and then bold. Delete it after. I saved you as boss. My name flickered in parentheses, the app's best guess, a ghost of the syllables I'd already heard. I listened again, not for words this time, but for the room. You can tell a lot from background noise, the way a city woman can identify her neighborhood by the pitch of the garbage trucks. There was the clatter of bar ice scooped from a metal well, the low electric hum of a tap system, and faint but unmistakable, someone in the distance saying, "Closing tab." The 2 words dragging together the way service staff say them near midnight. That wasn't an office. That wasn't a conference room. It was a wine bar, dim and forgiving, where conversations go to resurrect mistakes as romance. At 7:43 a.m., as if on cue, his name rolled across my screen with the casual authority of gravity. "Running late, meeting with the boss," he typed, and I felt my lungs tighten the way they do on a plane right before the cabin pressurizes. I typed back the lie wives tell when the truth would detonate the morning. "No worries, good luck." Then I opened his shared calendar, a visibility he'd set the year we decided adulthood meant transparency, and an entry winked at me like a dare. QBR prep, Aurelia Wine Bar, corner table. QBR, quarterly business review. I pictured a deck on a candlelit table, PowerPoint in a room built for Pinot Noir, and realized how easily people turn professional terms into camouflage. If you call it prep, you can hide a lot under a heading. I tested a boundary that used to be normal. "Screen share for 2 minutes?" I texted. "Want to help you rehearse the opener?" We used to do this all the time. Trade notes, practice, kill bad slides before they embarrassed us. The dots pulsed, then his reply arrived, polished and faintly scolding. "Feels like micromanaging, babe. I've got it." Micromanaging. The word landed like a door politely closed in my face. I logged it. Language choice, deflection, time. Because when you can't trust the heart, you can trust the timestamp. As if the universe wanted to make parody of objectivity, Jenna pinged me next with a sparkling invitation graphic. "Girls' night, Aurelia Wine Bar, Friday at 8. The same venue, the same night the calendar called QBR. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Jenna's message wore the innocence of community. A clink of glasses, a photo by the tiled wall. But the timing was too clean. I wrote back that I might swing by after a deadline, then turned my phone face down like a person trying to turn down a thought. In my head, I laid out the choices the way a strategist would. Confront now and let him shrink the story to jealousy, or wait and build a record that couldn't be argued with. I found the line between gut punch and plan and stood on it like a balance beam. That afternoon, I wrote my own private SLA for sanity. 5 days to proof. If I could corroborate what the audio implied by Friday, I would not corner him in our kitchen where excuses grow. I would confront him in a public forum built for accountability. His team's all hands, where he preaches trust and transparency while the HR rep sits in the second row with a pen. I wasn't hungry for spectacle. I was hungry for a place where gaslighting couldn't breathe. I kept working the live photo like a puzzle. I boosted the gain a notch and caught the air conditioner kick back on, a detail that anchors time, and under it the faint flutter of a credit card receipt tearing, thin paper, not office stock. I scrolled our joint bank app and found 3 cash withdrawals in as many weeks, matching the nights he'd worked late. A pattern is not proof, but it is the shadow proof throws. That evening, I made dinner the way a person performs normalcy to keep their hands from shaking. He came home smelling like the cologne that didn't belong to our bathroom and kissed me on the forehead like gratitude owed to a generous donor. We ate, and I asked him about one slide in his deck, and he talked and talked, relieved to be the version of himself who knows everything. When he showered, I took my tea to the couch and opened our shared album again, the one where the cat has more photos than any human should. A live photo of the cat waddling across the coffee table that very afternoon blinked open with the softness of a habit. I pressed my finger to the frame and let the audio rise. A sigh, the cat's bell, the cushion sinking beside me. I heard the faint buzz of his phone on the armrest, and the way he answered, voice a notch lower, a tone I only ever heard when he was selling something to someone who needed to feel special. I dragged backward 3 frames, then forward 4, slipped past the throat clear and the cat's sneeze, and landed right on a sliver of sound that the still image pretended didn't exist. A woman's voice, amused and sure, unfurled itself into my living room from behind the picture of my own coffee table. The sentence was short, almost tender, the way people talk when they think they have designed the perfect hiding place. He'll never check device links. His laptop pinged. My iPad answered. By morning, I had an explanation for the apparition of messages I wasn't meant to see. iCloud family. Sharing, the benevolent tyrant of convenience, had re-authenticated our devices after a minor outage, and in the reshuffle my iPad adopted his laptop like a stray. When his MacBook lit up at the office, my tablet at home stirred, and the conversation labeled boss walked itself into my living room with the cheerful entitlement of an app update. In contacts, the card I hadn't created showed 2 numbers neatly stacked, work and personal, under the alias boss, and when I tapped the info arrow, I saw a secondary email address masquerading as corporate but ending in a private domain. People think hiding is about darkness. Mostly it's about labels. I opened a fresh document and mapped a timeline the way I map user journeys at work. Left column, date, time, alibi. Center, artifacts. Right, what the artifacts say. Monday, late gym, 9:20 p.m. Center, lift receipt ending near a downtown block that does not smell like sweat. Tuesday, fire drill, 10:07 p.m. Center, joint account shows a cash withdrawal at a wine bar ATM. 20 minutes later, a Venmo split with a heart emoji from someone labeled E. Thursday, team dinner, 8:56 p.m. Center, my smartwatch registers our garage door opening at 12:13 a.m., meaning the team didn't need dessert or the team had a name. Patterns aren't proof, but when patterns rhyme, you lean closer. The Venmo note sent me into the small print the way a diver enters cold water. Tapping view details surfaced a digital bill with tip, and at the bottom someone had signed with a flourish I recognized from old holiday cards when his company sent branded blank notes for gratitude. 2 initials anchored the spiral, EK. I didn't know an EK, but my skin did. I looked again at the live photo transcript, the parenthetical where the app had guessed at my name, and imagined boss saying, delete the live, like you'd say pass the salt. I wanted a room to tell me the truth, so I went to the one where the waveform had said it lived. Aurelia Wine Bar sat on the corner like a secret with a good coat, Edison bulbs casting kind light on people who wanted flattering versions of themselves. I asked the hostess, gently and with the body language of a woman who isn't looking to get anyone fired, whether they had a QBR table on Fridays, corner booth, privacy preferred. She laughed the weary laugh of service workers, fluent in corporate euphemism, and said, yes, there's a corner the regulars call the quarterly. I described my husband in the neutral adjectives of a police report. She slid her eyes toward the end where a two-top sat half-shaded and said she remembered a man who claimed his boss is strict, then touched the woman's palm like a punchline. When she offered water, I took it to keep my hands company. At the bar, a man polishing stemware watched me not drink. He had the posture of someone who has learned to become furniture until asked to be human. When I paid for a seltzer I didn't want, he slipped a cocktail napkin beneath the glass with a date scribbled in tidy block letters, last Friday. If you're looking to remember, he said, not unkindly. Later, too late to feel rescued exactly, I would learn he sits in my husband's team Slack as a vendor success partner, a contractor looped into their company chat, the kind of false ally who smiles with both sides of his mouth and waits to see who keeps their job. Humiliation did its usual work. It threatened to curl me into myself, to make me smaller where the room was warm and forgiving. I let the ache pass through like weather, and chose composure with the practicality of changing shoes before a long walk. Collect, don't collapse. I photographed the napkin next to the register's timestamp, emailed it to myself, then returned home with the steadiness of a person who has made it across a glass bridge without looking down. Back on the couch, the cat waddled into the frame of my day like comic relief, and I reached for the comfort of our album that keeps his ridiculous expressions. I pressed a live photo from the night before and listened as the room announced itself. Fabric hush, collar bell, cushion sigh. Then, beneath it, the brittle insect sound of his phone vibrating against the wood armrest. He had answered without moving much. The microphone is a nosy friend. Delete the live, the woman said, same amused certainty, and the words drilled through the picture into the present. I saved the clip to the locked folder, wrote repeat directive, DL, in my notes, and watched the sentence transform from command to evidence. The last test in my little lab was motion. I had tucked an AirTag in the pocket of his car months ago for mundane reasons, lost keys insurance mostly. Opening the Find My app felt like opening a window. A dot pulsed on a map across town where the streets grid into quiet and the buildings have frosted windows that pretend privacy is opaque. I zoomed until the blue circle settled and the address resolved. A mid-rise with planters that tried too hard. A block I recognized from the Venmo footprint. The label floated up under my thumb like a confession. EK's apartment. The dot didn't move. Her name wasn't on the buzzer, but her laugh found me through the vent. I parked across from the mid-rise that the map had circled, a building pretending to be discreet with frosted stairwell panels and planters too sculpted to be sincere. The evening made everyone's windows into pale rectangles of uncommitted light, and I set my phone on the console, opened voice memos, and labeled a new file like a field note. EK exterior, time, weather, ambient. The gut punch of betrayal wanted me to march up the steps and press every button until someone let me in. The part of me that believes in chain of custody reminded my hands to stay on the wheel. I recorded the ambient audio the way I do soundscapes for research, passing buses, elevator whir, a distant dog. Because time anchors memory when memory is tempted to soften for comfort. I noted the temperature, the smell of hot mulch, the quiet scrape of a skateboard rolling past. Boundaries are not just moral choices. They're the scaffolding that keeps your version of events standing when someone leans on it. The lobby door opened on a little burst of conditioned air and the clatter of bracelets, and in the slice of light I saw a hand push out to toss a takeout bag into the bin. The bracelet flashed, a slim chain with a microcharm that tucked to the inside of the wrist. I knew it before my brain admitted it. The same bracelet he'd clasped on me last spring with a speech about matching energies, a gift he'd called personal because he had remembered I like delicate things. Copy-paste gifts are the quietest kind of theft, a laundering of intimacy through retail. I photographed the hand only in my mind, because tonight my proof needed to be clean. A laugh folded into the vented slats above the door, the laugh from the live photo that had braided itself under my kitchen still. You learn a person's voice the way you learn a map of your city, the sound of their vowel in your name, the way certainty rides their breath. EK emerged with her head tucked into a hoodie that wasn't made for her, sleeves pushed to her knuckles, a logo on the chest I recognized from a company retreat where I sat in the back and took notes while he promised a culture of candor. She was pretty in the way that youth or good lighting makes people pretty, but it was the hoodie that hit me, the casual theft of my domestic shorthand. She paused at the curb, thumbs busy, and then lifted her head to laugh again, softer this time, as if the joke lived on her phone. I heard boss without hearing the word. A man unlocking his bike near me glanced over when I rolled my window down an inch and asked if the building manager kept office hours or if there was a card posted. He pointed to a bulletin board behind the glass and said the manager was always around, that residents complained when he wasn't. I thanked him, waited until the lobby emptied, then walked to the door and took a picture of the corkboard through the pane. Back in the car, I zoomed on the business card tacked at an angle. Manager name, number, email, and beneath it a typed list of units with owner of record in a font chosen by someone who has never wanted to be questioned. Unit 4C, EK's floor, showed the owner as a Shell LLC with a name so bland it dared you to care. I pasted it into the Secretary of State search and found the registered agent, my husband's college friend, the one who tells long stories about entrepreneurship and asks women what they do for fun as if their jobs are inconveniences. The LLC's mailing address was a P.O. box one suburb over. When people tell you they are ethical, look at their mail. My phone chewed the edge of the seat with a vibration that sounded urgent even before I saw the name. Jenna. You okay? Need anything? Saw you were out? Want the pin for that new wine bar? The message wore active concern the way leggings wear branding. Tight, visible, trying to pass for neutral. Beneath the text, without my asking, an Apple Maps card unfurled with the exact pin to this building. Not the wine bar. This building. I stared so long the map rotated without me. I typed, "I'm good, thanks," and watched the bubble sit there like a neutral face in a mirror. If she had meant help, she would have asked a different question. If she had meant to warn me, she wouldn't have sent the address to the theater. EK returned from the curb with a paper bag, pulled the door open with a grocery store elbow, and disappeared into the stairwell. I could have called out. I didn't. I had already decided the only room I trusted was one with an audience and a policy posted on the wall. Gaslighting needs privacy and appetite. I intended to starve it of both. I kept recording, marked the time she re-entered, noted the elevator stop on 4, and saved the file to the same locked folder that held the live photos, the napkin date, the bar receipt. If pain couldn't be smaller, it could at least be organized. A half hour later, when the sky had pulled its shade down to navy, I shut the car off and stepped into the night to stretch my legs. The air had that late evening grocery store hum that cities get when they're done pretending, and I caught my reflection in the lobby glass, a woman with two versions of herself and a plan. Something crisp under my wiper blade caught the corner of my eye. A parking stub, folded once, anchored by the rubber. I slid it free, expecting a warning. The paper was warm from the hood and smelled like toner. In the top corner, a stamp announced a vendor name I recognized from 100 catered meetings. All Hands Catering, Friday. Under the stamp, a handwritten pair of initials looped with confidence. EK. The date matched his team's calendar and Jenna's invitation. The corner of the receipt cut a neat line across my palm as I folded it. I had my next room and my witness, and now I had their menu. Their practice run slipped into my camera roll. The sync happened while I was loading the dishwasher, a small animation stuttering across my iPad as if a stranger had walked in and sat on the sofa. Another live photo arrived without ceremony, our dining room at golden hour, his tie draped over a chair back like a tired snake, the edge of my notebook visible where I had been drafting a grocery list that suddenly felt like a parody of domesticity. I pressed the image and let it wake. The room tone unfurled first. The radiator's faint hiss, the low rush of evening traffic, the soft tick of the antique clock that pretends it remembers a gentler century. Then came the whisper I already knew by temperature. Say my boss. Requested late review, she coached, every syllable sanded into plausibility, and in the beat that followed I heard him practice the line back, rounding the word boss until it fit like an alibi he could wear to brunch. I exported the live photo as a video before the app could decide to simplify my life by destroying my evidence. I saved the waveform as if it were an EKG, peaks where they shouldn't be, valleys that proved a heart was involved, and captured an impulse response of the room by snapping my fingers once, quick, so any future analysis could strip our dining room signature from the whispers. Then I emailed the file to myself and to a repository address I use for fieldwork, Subject line coded in a way only I would parse. Dining LP 002 coached line. Chain of custody is not romantic, but it is the handrail you hold when someone else wants to push you down the stairs and insist you tripped. In the background of the clip, layered beneath their rehearsal, a computer chimed with the specific, almost prim tone of a new email on an enterprise account. His laptop screen flashed in the reflection on the dining room glass, and for a blink I could see the sender field bloom with a corporate domain that did not belong to his company at all. It was hers. EK's employer logo sat there like a watermark on our conversation, and an email subject line with the word renewal told me this wasn't just a romance that had mistaken itself for courage. It was a negotiation, vendor to client. My house had been used as a side channel for a deal that would pay someone's bonus. I paused the frame and wrote in my notebook, in the same pen I had used to list cilantro and dish soap. Conflict of interest, undisclosed relationship, reputational and financial risk. The gut punch of betrayal had new company. It had a policy. Jenna chose that exact moment to send me care disguised as a leash. A link hit my messages with a cheerful line, "Thought this might help, wellness check, XOXO," and resolved into an article about how paranoid partners invent stories when stressed, complete with stock photos of women staring at blinds. The timing was a performance. The topic was a prescription. The subtext was a verdict rendered without a trial. I replied with a thank you so neutral it could have been a receipt and filed the link under Narrative Management Jenna. I do not owe anyone my unraveling. I typed a short, courteous direct message to EK that would read calmly in Discovery. "Hi E, I'm reaching out directly to set a boundary. If there's any overlap between your role and my husband's, I'm requesting that communication remain professional, disclosed, and in writing to appropriate channels. I don't want surprises." It was the kind of note women send when we are still pretending the world wants order. 10 minutes later, the dots pulsed, and her reply arrived, efficient and smug in equal measure. "We're strictly work," she wrote, then added a single period, an emoji smirk's cousin, the smiley rendered as punctuation. The period sat there like a dare, a warning that she had learned how to end things cleanly even when they were not clean. I RSVP'd to the all-hands invite the way a spouse RSVPs to a holiday party, clicking yes on a form that did not realize it was being wielded as a safeguard. I booked my seat in the back row where the AV tech sits with a coil of cables and a consent form no one reads, and I planned the confrontation in plain, unemotional sentences. One question about policy, one request for a neutral investigation, one refusal to let the narrative eat me. I printed the vendor relationship clause and slipped it behind a clean copy of the agenda, so that when I opened my folder, professionalism would be the first image the room saw. He arrived home that night with the loose-limbed relief of a man who believes rehearsal has made him invincible. He loosened his tie, kissed me on the cheek as if signing for a package, and told me a story about a deadline that wanted to be a hero. I pretended to forget dessert so I could stand up and breathe. In the kitchen, my iPad pinged, with the breezy confidence of a cloud that keeps secrets until it doesn't. The boss thread had silently split like a cell under glass, the original tucked beneath a new conversation whose title wore a lawyer's cologne. He had renamed her contact to legal, a fresh iMessage thread sprouting like a weed he thought would look like a rose if you didn't get close. I didn't have to get close. Family sharing had already made me a witness, and the blue bubbles kept arriving, cheerful and damning in the same font as dinner plans and birthdays. My iPad still saw everything. Quarterly business review isn't performed under dim Edison bulbs. By Thursday, I needed the room itself to either indict me or absolve me, so I went back to Aurelia Wine Bar in daylight, when the mirrors look honest and the floor smells faintly of lemon oil instead of endings. The manager recognized me with the politeness reserved for regulars and emergencies, and when I asked whether there was a standing reservation for a QBR on Fridays, he didn't blink. He nodded toward the corner booth I had already circled in my head and said it had been a late evening hold for weeks. He used the euphemism the service industry taught him, privacy preferred, and I heard the addendum unspoken. Predictable company, predictable order, predictable lies. I asked for a redacted copy of a recent receipt to confirm timestamps, and he obliged. Date, hour, subtotal, tip, card, last four masked, the way liability likes its paper neat. I photographed it against the host stand clock for context, emailed it to myself with the subject QBR, corner, time anchored, and felt the practical relief of friction, paper against glass, information against air. While I waited for my seltzer, the bar's playlist drifted across a familiar register, and I watched the place warm toward its evening self. Ice scooped into wells, a rack of Bordeaux polished under a towel, a couple rehearsing a breakup they would postpone for dessert. The bartender from earlier, cap low, posture patient, worked his quiet ballet of rinse, shake, pour, and in the hush between songs he glanced up and recognized me in the way of people who keep their eyes on the room. A man in a navy blazer paid and pushed off from his stool, and the bartender's farewell landed with practiced ease. "See you next week, Tom." My husband's name, delivered like a secret that believed itself harmless. It rang against the bottles and settled into my bones with the weary accuracy of a weather report. At a high top near the back, a woman in a camel cardigan spoke into her phone and then into the thin air between people. "FYI, I've pinned the voice memo to the shared board," she said, and the phrase slid into me like a shard that matched an empty space. Voice memo, shared board, the corporate shorthand of a vendor who needs alignment without accountability. I didn't need to see the screen to know the cadence. It was the same clipped efficiency I'd heard under my dining room's room tone when EK coached his line about a late review. I caught 3 words as she hit send: push renewal narrative, and winded them around a phrase from the live photo like twine. In research, the joke is that triangulation is just a fancy word for listening from 3 different angles. Today, the joke was a map. When the bartender returned with the seltzer I wasn't going to drink, I thanked him by name and asked an unremarkable question about their Friday crowd. He answered easily, told me the stemware ran out by 9 and the corner table belonged to the quarterly crew, then hesitated as if something tugged at his sleeve. He set down the napkin and, in the same low register he must use when he tells teenagers to hydrate between rounds, said, "Jenna stopped by earlier this week. Said if you asked, keep things neutral, don't volunteer." He didn't sound like a conspirator. He sounded like a man whose rent is due and whose conscience has to live somewhere. The fatigue I had been carrying since Sunday rearranged itself into a steadier weight. False allies are ballast when you recognize them. They keep you from tilting into hysteria. The ache of public humiliation, imagining the staff as a Greek chorus to my marriage, had been gnawing me all week. Here in the light, it softened into something nearly useful. I pulled out my notebook and wrote 3 lines the way I write statements in testing debriefs when we need to say something precise in front of people who would prefer myth. 1. Ask about vendor romance policy as a hypothetical. Request neutral review. 2. Reference conflict of interest clause without names. Anchor to receipts and timestamps. 3. Set boundary. No discussion in private. Transparency and documented channels only. I copied the lines onto a card I could fold into my sleeve and practiced them with my mouth closed so my face would know the words when it was time. Courage, I have learned, is often just memorization performed calmly. On my way out, I stood for a minute where the ambient sound of the bar braided itself into the afternoon traffic and gave my attention to the small details that would later make the room vivid when I needed a jury of strangers to feel present. The click of the register drawer, the thunk of a cork eased into a palm rather than the bar, the way the Edison bulbs hummed like a distant hive. I tried to imagine my husband here, in this flattering light, shaping boss into an alibi, while the bartender refilled waters and Jenna rehearsed her neutrality just beyond the potted fig. The image did not crush me, it enlarged my plan. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the sun had tipped low enough to turn parked cars into mirrors, and I caught my reflection on a hood, jaw set, eyes steady, a woman rehearsing clarity instead of collapse. My phone lit in my hand before it could settle into my pocket, an unknown number marching across the glass in the universal font of uninvited authority. I considered letting it roll into the pile where numbers go to be ignored, then pressed accept because fear hates clean records, and I was building one. The line was quiet for a beat, as if measuring how much oxygen I would allow it to use. A man's voice finally arrived, altered slightly by caution, the kind of disguise a person thinks will pass if he believes women don't listen closely to breath and consonants. "Stop digging," he said, careful, practiced, the consonants sharp as staples. It's not what you think. They said optics twice before saying my name once. I booked a confidential HR slot the way you book a dentist appointment you can't keep postponing, out of self-respect, not enthusiasm. The coordinator's calendar link framed everything as wellness, but the moment the call connected, the tone shifted into the neutral glide of corporate anesthesia. I kept the conversation clinical and unnamed, a hypothetical paved with caution. If an employee managing a high-value renewal were romantically involved with a vendor representative, what disclosures were required and when? The HR partner thanked me for raising awareness, said she appreciated my proactive alignment, and then steered the car onto her favorite road, optics. From an optics standpoint, she said, and then again, for optics, as if photographs mattered more than facts, as if the lens would be our judge. I took notes with the discipline my job trained into my wrist and asked for the written policy rather than the vibe. In plain English, their rule was simple and stern. No undisclosed romantic entanglements with vendors during live negotiations, period. Any personal relationship had to be reported, walled off, and if necessary, reassigned. It wasn't morality, it was risk management. Conflicts, coercion, insider tilt. Exactly his project. I let myself breathe through my mouth so it wouldn't sound like triumph. At the end of the call, I repeated back what I had heard and asked for the policy PDF. She promised to send it shortly and thanked me again for my attention to optics. And for a second I pictured her desk, a neat stack of language, a scented candle named after a beach that never had meetings. I hung up and immediately wrote the summary email I knew I'd need when the story tried to sprout alternate versions. Subject line, Vendor Relationship Policy, clarified, call 1002-1027. In the body, bullet points, dates, the exact phrasing about disclosures and negotiations, a request for the promised PDF, and a one-sentence descriptor of my hypothetical. To make sure the context couldn't be retrofitted, I sent it to my personal account and BCC'd a friend who does employment law the way surgeons do sutures. Precise, patient, relentless. The timestamp landed like a seal. The internet, that elastic court of public opinion, decided to test my posture an hour later. Jenna lobbed a subtweet with the elegance of a paper airplane that knows its target. Some people don't need therapy. They need to stop reading their partner's devices like tarot cards. A cluster of co-workers liked it within minutes, the same 3 who perform allyship on Pride weekend and call it a year. I stared at the screen long enough for the blue hearts to become ants. Then I closed the app because humiliation grows where it's watered, and I had a deck to build. I opened Keynote and did what I do best, make a chaotic narrative sit still. Title slide, Timeline and Policy, Request for Neutral Review. Slide 2, the dates mapped cleanly. Live photos, receipts, the napkin with the bartender's scrawl, the bar's redacted receipt, the AirTag pings, the Friday all hands. Slide 3, screenshots with context, no names on public screens, just the captions that told the truth plainly. Audio. Saved you as boss. Room tone, bar ice, voice, female. Slide 4, plain English translations of the policies HR had paraphrased and the specific line about vendor entanglements during negotiation. Slide 5. My ask, to move the renewal to a neutral party and open a documented review. I did not include the parts of my heart that wanted apologies, or the parts of my pride that wanted a stage. I included facts, requests, and the calm of someone who will not be told she is hysterical for noticing what's in front of her. At lunch, I took my laptop to the office cafe because the hum of other people's keyboards can sometimes keep a person from dissolving. I sat with my back to a wall and the entrance in my line of sight, old habits of safety masquerading as preference. The espresso machine hissed at regular intervals like a metronome for decisions. A cluster of vendor reps settled 2 tables over, badges tucked into blazers like contraband, and I felt the paranoia I'd been managing try to take the wheel. Tech-backed courage steadied me. The deck, the emails, the timestamps, the chain of custody inside a cloud that lives nowhere and everywhere. Courage isn't louder than fear. It's better documented. I just finished annotating the slide with the bar's corner table timestamp when a handful of Apple devices bloomed onto my screen like shy fish. Airdrop from E, airdrop from Aaron K, airdrop from unknown. The cafe is a bowl of overlapping signals. Strangers' phones flirt all day. I looked up, and there she was. Camel cardigan, precise eyeliner, the bracelet twin bent over her latte while a co-worker explained something with his hands. My throat made a small decision not to be surprised. I turned my airdrop to contacts only and went back to my notes. A second later, the preview forced itself into the corner of my desktop anyway, because tech has its own sense of humor. An image thumbnail hovered, waiting for permission, the title in her phone's casual naming convention. Fry Prep Final Juro Chaidas, Sai Badian JPG. It should have been a slide or a screenshot of a contract block. Instead, the preview square resolved into a slice of my life she should not have. Our hallway, evening light golding the runner rug, the edge of my mirror, a pair of his shoes lined up like good soldiers. In the foreground, the lower third of a woman's face, smudged lip color, the corner of a smile that wasn't meant for me, hair spilling into the frame as if the camera had been lifted and then lowered in a hurry. The metadata line under the file name ticked past. 7:12 p.m. Location tagged to my address. My finger hovered above decline, but I didn't click. EK had airdropped me a selfie from inside my house, and the cafe light felt suddenly fluorescent. Too bright for lies, not bright enough for rage. One press-held image, and the whispered audio flooded the speakers. All Hands Day arrived with fluorescent certainty, the kind of office light that makes everyone look a little more honest or a little more tired. I took a seat near the back where the AV cart lives, close enough to read faces but far enough to be dismissed as scenery if anyone needed me to be invisible. He stepped onto the stage with a deck titled Trust and Transparency, and the irony didn't land so much as float, like a balloon someone forgot to tie down. He wore the conference smile he saves for earnings calls and eulogies, and the front rows leaned in because leadership always sounds like a warm bath when you're cold with deadlines. HR settled 2 seats from the aisle with a notebook open and 2 pens aligned as if even their stationery needed to model compliance, while he walked the team through pillars with verbs for names, build, share, own. I arranged my evidence the way a violinist checks her bow. Phone in airplane mode until I needed it. Live photo clipped to a favorites folder. Policy slide printed on plain paper in case tech decided to have a mood. My heart thudded a steady metronome beneath a calm I had practiced all week, the kind you can only build by writing your own script. When the Q&A slide arrived with its cheerful lowercase, "Ask me anything," hands went up for questions about comp, about roadmap, about swag. I waited. He grinned the way men grin when they believe a room is on their side. When the polite murmurs thinned, I raised my hand. "Quick policy clarification," I said, voice even, cadence measured. Heads turned because the sound of a woman not apologizing for speaking has its own pitch. If an employee leading a negotiation has an undisclosed personal relationship with a vendor representative during that negotiation, does policy require disclosure and reassignment? I did not say his name. I did not say hers. I did not say mine. HR looked relieved to have a question with the chapter and verse answer. "Yes," she said, already writing. "Disclosure is required, and reassignment is recommended depending on scope." The room nodded with the comfort of rules. He swallowed nothing, but the microphone caught it anyway. "I appreciate that," I said, and turned slightly to the AV tech, a patient man in a black hoodie who spends his days translating chaos into HDMI. I had asked him before the meeting if I could mirror for a single 30-second clip as part of a clarifying question, and he'd said yes, because polite requests are easier to honor than surprises. He tapped the input switch with the same gentle authority a nurse uses with IVs. My phone whispered the AirPlay chime, and the Apple TV behind him caught its breath. "This is a live photo from our dining room," I said. "The kind that attaches 1.5 seconds of audio to a still. It will play once." I pressed my thumb to the image of sunlight on our table, because his choices had insisted on making our home a witness, and the room soundscape changed shape. First the radiator hiss, the cat's bell, the soft tick of the antique clock like an old man clearing his throat, then her whisper, exactly as I heard it while loading a dishwasher I suddenly hated. Deleted after. A beat, and his voice followed with eager obedience masquerading as caution. Saved you as boss. The speakers weren't loud. The truth made its own volume. Something seismic but silent moved through the rows. A collective recognition, a recalculation of probabilities, the sound of a story losing altitude. Jenna stood so quickly her chair hiccuped against the carpet, muttered something about a call, and left without looking back. The front row borrowed one long blink and turned it into whispering, the kind that tries to be paper thin and ends up audible anyway. HR's pen accelerated. My hands didn't shake. I did not look at him. He stared at the screen the way people stare at weather reports on the day they decide to ignore evacuation orders. I'm not here to accuse anyone in this room, I said, keeping the microphone steady just below my chin. I'm requesting a neutral investigation by a party not currently engaged in this negotiation, reassignment of the renewal until the review is complete, and preservation of relevant communications. I'll provide my timeline, documents, and the original files to HR today. The word files sounded clinical and safe. My heart wanted thunder. My mouth chose governance. I turned back to HR. I'm happy to send everything immediately following this meeting. She nodded once, slow, the nod of a person who has just realized the company is a stage, and today's show is not optional. He began with the oldest defense in the book. This is out of context. It's remarkable how much contempt can fit into 4 syllables without tipping into profanity. I didn't take the bait. That's why I'm asking for a context review, I replied. His smile, half weapon, half habit, stayed stuck to his face like a sticker you can't peel off without taking paint. He pivoted to process, said he wished I'd raised this privately, said we were a family, and the room flinched because nobody likes that word at work unless there's cake. Transparency belongs in public, I said, not loudly but with finality. The AV tech, who has seen more meltdowns than a kindergarten teacher, kept his eyes on the input toggle like a man guarding a dam. HR cleared her throat and did the most useful thing anyone did all day. She took the microphone from me. We'll pause the meeting here and move into next steps, she said, voice trained to sound like a soft landing. Please send your materials to my email right now. We'll follow the policy. She looked at him with bureaucratic kindness, which is the only variety that matters. We'll also collect devices for IT review on this project. The subtext arrived without a slide. The room was not going back to normal. I sat down because there is power in sitting when the instinct is to flee. The AV tech handed me back my cable like a communion wafer. People avoided my eye, not out of hostility but out of superstition, as if my steadiness were contagious and they might catch responsibility by accident. He glanced at his phone because that's what people do when they need a script. It lit up in his hand under the stage lights, unhelpfully honest. The contact name at the top of the call banner wore its disguise like a cheap hat. Legal. The phone vibrated again, and the preview flashed the last 2 messages from the thread above the call, one from last night, one from 2 hours ago. The number was the same. The alias had changed. Boss was calling him from the new label, and the whole room watched the lie ring. He said it was love. The spreadsheet called it logistics. After the all hands, he cornered me in a hallway that smells like toner and lemon cleaner and tried to drape a tone of reason over the wreckage. You're overreacting, he began, hands open, voice pitched to the sympathetic register menus when they want you to apologize for noticing. I didn't argue. I answered with dates. Friday, 9:42 p.m., corner table at Aurelia. Monday, 10:07 p.m., cash withdrawal at the bar ATM. Tuesday, 7:12 p.m., airdrop from your vendor's device in our hallway. Wednesday, 6:11 a.m., morning boss. He blinked like a man looking into a strobe. HR stepped between us with the soft authority of policy and scheduled a formal review for the afternoon, the kind of meeting where laptops stay closed and words are measured in liabilities per minute. Before lunch, a teammate slid into my inbox with a courage that comes in attachments. Sharing anonymously, the note read, no names, just a handful of screenshots clipped so tight they looked like postage stamps. Calendar holds titled QBR, recurring Fridays, 8:30, 10:30 p.m. Location pinned to the wine bar's corner. In the notes field of 1, bring scarf. which would have been nothing if I hadn't watched EK loop that gauzy scarf around her throat as she laughed outside the frosted stairwell. In another prep renewal story, a phrase that belongs to sales decks, not to my dining room, I printed them, trimmed the edges clean, and anchored them to my timeline with a paperclip because order is the opposite of panic. I went back to the Shell LLC that held EK's lease like a glove and tugged at the cuff. The registered agent's name, my husband's friend with the entrepreneurial monologues, linked to 2 more entities that smelled like cardboard and shortcuts, and the mailing address I'd flagged in my notes appeared again on a different filing, a consulting firm that supports vendor alignment through hospitality partnerships. The words were beautiful if you didn't know what they did. I mapped arrows the way my team diagrams customer flows, and the pattern stopped being implication and started being architecture. Love had a mailing address. Ethics had left a forwarding notice. At 1:13 p.m., an email arrived from EK with a subject line that mistook brevity for neutrality. Clarification. The body was 3 sentences long and tried to be air. I'm sorry for any confusion. Our interactions have been professional. If anything read otherwise, I regret the misunderstanding. It should have felt like triumph. It tasted like talc. I downloaded the .eml anyway, because habit loves receipts, and checked the metadata. Origin, his laptop name, the one he never renamed after grad school. Drafted in mail on his machine, sent from her account through a web client. Logistics, not love. The bartender texted a number I'd saved under Aurelia front bar, the digits Spartan and direct in, like a good pour. I shouldn't, but I'm sending stills, he wrote, and 4 images followed, each a clean rectangle of the corner booth on different Fridays. The frames were not lurid or cinematic. They were the quiet, damning kind, 2 glasses on coasters, his hand on her wrist where a stage direction in Client Suite 3 had once underlined. The bartender's own timestamp reflected in the mirror, a napkin with a date matching the one he'd slipped me. I'm done being neutral, he added, and I felt a private gratitude that tasted like water after a sprint. False allies exhaust themselves when they remember they have spines. I didn't gloat, I listed. The rhythm steadied me. Live photo audio, deleted after, saved you as boss. Transcript with room tone notes, bar ice, radiator, cat bell, bar receipt redacted, calendar holds, bring scarf. AirTag pings, EK's block, foresee elevator stop, EK's clarification with metadata drafted on his device, Shell LLC filings, registered agent, Charo's friend, hospitality partnerships, bartender stills, time-stamped. I added the anonymous teammate screenshots and the HR policy excerpt about vendor entanglements during active negotiations, highlighted in the yellow of high school exams. The deck wasn't an accusation, it was a diagnosis. At 2:04 p.m., HR sent the calendar invite for the review. Subject, Project Renewal, Scope and Staffing. No names in the title, just nouns trying to keep everyone calm. In the body, a line I wanted to frame. Please bring any materials relevant to vendor relationship disclosures. I attached my packet to a reply and watched the progress bar climb while my pulse counted its own seconds. Across the aisle of desks, he typed with the furious stillness of a man trying to outpace a narrative. When he stood to refill his water, a sticky note clung to his shoe like a small yellow truth. The review room was windowless in the way of rooms that don't want to be distracted by sky. A churcher sat at the head with a legal pad so new it still smelled like store. She asked for my materials first, and I slid the folder forward without ceremony, then emailed the zip files while she initialed the chain of custody sheet that IT had helpfully provided, as if they'd been waiting for a reason to print it. She asked him for his device inventory next: phone, laptop, personal tablet if used for work, and he performed offense. This is invasive, he protested, and HR performed patience. This is policy, she replied, and beneath the table, my hands unclenched by half an inch. We were 10 minutes in when my phone buzzed with a message from the teammate who had sent the calendar holds. FYI, he asked IT for server room access just now. I lifted my eyes to HR. You'll want to know he's requesting server room access, I said, and watched the information land like a tap on a chess clock. She didn't look at him. She looked at the IT. Liaison at her left and nodded once. The liaison typed a sentence that changed the afternoon. An email pinged softly in the room's quiet, and the HR lead read it before anyone else could. "Thank you," she said to me, then to him, voice even as a level. "Please hand over your phone and badge. It will image your devices. We're also temporarily revoking your server room pass pending review." The last word hung there like a verdict, and then sat down. He gripped his lanyard the way a man grips a rail in sudden turbulence, and for the first time all week, I felt the floor steady under my feet. He renamed the contact twice. Policy only cares that he hid. The review room felt engineered to rent stories of their charm. No windows, no plants, just a table that insisted on angles and a speakerphone that made every word sound like a deposition. I slid the curated packet across the laminate and watched H's open it with the neatness of a person who has seen what chaos does to a life. On top, I'd placed a cover sheet that functioned like a legend, live photos with audio transcripts and room tone notes, redacted receipts and bar confirmations, airdrop incident with embedded metadata, device link logs from family sharing, calendar holds labeled QER with the bring scarf note circled, and a short appendix titled Ethics and Exposure. My heart thudded, but my hands performed a steadiness rehearsed over a week of being told to doubt what I could hear. I explained in plain English because plain English survives cross-examination. Live photos, I said, are not traps. They're tiny videos Apple attaches to stills by design. 1.5 seconds of motion and audio that capture context. Your eyes didn't. You don't need a forensics lab to play them. You need a thumb. I pressed play on the dining room clip, then handed over the exported .movie with the waveform labeled and the room's impulse response captured, so IT could strip out the radiator hiss and confirm the whispered sentences weren't stitched. "Delete it after," she says, and then his voice, "Saved you as boss." The tech liaison nodded without looking at me. He had already heard it in the all hands and had the face of a person aligning files to policy in his head. Next, I placed the bar confirmation prints beside the redacted receipt with the host stand clock photo for time anchoring and slid over the manager's brief note confirming the quarterly corner table hold on Fridays. The live photo from our couch, captured at 5:12 p.m., carried the telltale buzz of his phone and a matching directive, "Delete the live." And I let the room hear it once, then set the transcript down so the words could sit on paper where spin breathes less easily. I added the family sharing device logs. His MacBook re-authenticated, my iPad receiving message previews under the boss, alias at 6:11 a.m. New thread labeled legal spawning from the same number post-confrontation. He renamed the contact twice, I said, keeping my tone dry as a manual. Policy doesn't care what he calls her. It cares that he concealed the relationship during active negotiation. The ethics angle sat in its own tab, because shareholder risk speaks a dialect every corporation understands. "This isn't just my marriage," I said, tapping the appendix. "It's vendor influence during a negotiation slated to impact quarterly revenue, misaligned incentives, undisclosed conflict, hospitality partnerships tied to a Shell LLC registered to his close friend, and off-channel communications inside my home. If the renewal signs under these conditions, we're not just hurting me, we're gambling with reputational and financial exposure." I did not look at him when I said exposure. I looked at the HR lead because she kept the keys to process, and process was the only bridge I trusted. He chose mentoring as his lifeboat. "I was advising her," he said, palms up, voice pitched to sincerity. "She's junior. I was helping her prepare for tough rooms. The boss thing was a stupid joke." He smiled at the phrase joke like it might rescue him by making the room complicit. HR didn't blink. "Who signed the lease for Unit 4C's Shell LLC?" she asked, glancing at the filings I'd printed, and his sentence tripped over its own verbs. "A friend manages that. Look, I don't control his businesses." The tech liaison asked him to confirm whether EK's clarification email to me had been drafted from his laptop. He blustered about shared resources and workstation mix-ups, then quieted when the metadata line displayed on the printout with his machine's name in 12-point Arial. Logistics swallowed love whole and didn't apologize. My phone pinged with a text that might once have derailed me. "Jenna, I'm sorry." He lied to all of us. It read like a white flag knit out of self-preservation. I archived it without reply. Contrition that arrives after a microphone is not a character reference. It is a weather report. I returned my attention to the list because lists don't flirt, and I walked HR through the airdrop incident in the office cafe. File name Fry Prep Final Jochisit. Sai JPR. Thumbnail of my hallway. Timestamp matching my address, and handed over the .eml of EK's email, the bartender's time-stamped stills, the teammates' anonymized QBR holds with bring scarf, and the family sharing screenshots that showed boss becoming legal while remaining numerically the same. The HR lead asked only good questions. Have you preserved originals? Yes. Locked album, mirrored to personal cloud, sent to repository with checksum hashes. IT could verify integrity. Any contact with the vendor rep outside these exchanges? One boundary setting DM from me logged at time X, screenshot attached. Her reply claimed strictly work, punctuated by a period that looked like smugness and would mercifully decode as posture. Any other witnesses? The bar manager for reservation pattern, the bartender for stills, an anonymized teammate for calendar holds, the AV tech for the all-hands playback and Apple TV logs. Ask, I said, and slid the last page forward, reassign the renewal to an arm's-length owner, preserve devices, initiate a neutral review, notify legal about the Shell LLC, bar any preemptive retaliatory action. He tried to pivot to dignity. I wish she had come to me. We're a family. HR's pen didn't pause. We are a company, she said, the sentence landing with the soft finality of a closed door. She turned to the IT liaison and nodded. The liaison collected our devices with the calm of a librarian receiving overdue books and slid 2 forms across the table, chain of custody and temporary access change confirmation. My signature looked like mine. His looked like a weather pattern. The room exhaled a bureaucratic breath that felt like air after weeks underwater. HR summarized next steps for the record, then added 2 sentences that moved the story from rumor to governance. Effective immediately, we are pausing your access to systems related to the renewal and postponing the vendor signing scheduled for Friday, she said, voice even, pen steady. EK is removed from the account pending review. The speakerphone didn't hum. It held its breath. He stared at his dim phone as if a new alias might save him, and for the first time since morning, boss, I felt the proof stand up on its own legs and walk. They wanted me quiet. I chose clear. By morning, the building's glass looked like water you could walk across if you didn't think too hard about gravity. I drafted 1 message to the team and read it aloud until my voice lost its anger and kept its spine. I sent it to the all-hands channel, once, measured, factual. I thanked people for their patience, stated that HR had opened a neutral review regarding vendor policies, and that I would not be discussing details in Slack or DMs. I asked for space to do my job while the process ran. No grand statements, no diary entries, just boundaries written like rails. The channel, usually allergic to silence, stayed still for a full minute, a rare office miracle. Then a few colleagues added the digital equivalent of nods. Acknowledgement emojis, yes, but also a line or 2 that sounded like respect rather than gossip. I closed the tab because righteousness curdles when it lingers where it isn't needed. My manager pinged me privately, not with cheerleading, but with something rarer. Context. You handled it like a grown-up, she wrote, and you gave the process a chance to breathe. It read like an arm around the shoulder without the performative squeeze, and I let myself absorb the validation with the caution of a person who's learned how quickly wind changes direction in offices built of glass. She asked if I would be open to recommending improvements once the dust settled, then added, almost as an aside, that a few of the execs were already asking for a clearer vendor boundary checklist. Subtle solidarity tastes like tap water when you've been drinking panic for days. At lunch, I took the bracelet from my drawer, the delicate chain he'd once clasped on me with an expression rehearsed to look spontaneous, and turned it in my hand until it caught the light and showed its trick. The microcharm stamped with a code that unlocked a vault in someone else's story. I placed it in a small linen pouch, walked it down to reception, and asked for inter-office delivery to his desk. No note, no grandstanding, just a transfer of property with the finality of a door closing soft and complete. The receptionist, who knows everything without saying anything, slid the pouch into the bin and met my eyes for a second that felt like witness. Returning the duplicate gift wasn't about humiliation. It was an audit of my own house. Whatever sentiment had been borrowed to sell the gesture, I was repossessing mine. That afternoon I sent HR a one-page proposal I'd written between meetings, a document that had spent years in my head without a reason to be born. Title: Third-Party Audit, Vendor Influence and Hospitality Touchpoints. The bullet points were simple. Periodic audits of renewal cycles with hospitality spend flagged. Disclosure forms for employees with vendor contact outside business hours. A short training that translates optics into actual steps. An escalation path that doesn't require a spouse to become a process owner. I framed it not as punishment, but as good housekeeping. Less about catching sinners and more about keeping honest people from being slowly taught to lie. The HR lead responded in 20 minutes with the rare sentence that makes corporate time feel human. Yes, let's do it. She CEC'd legal and procurement. I swallowed the urge to cry and sent the draft checklist before my hands could remember they were hands. The day did that thing days do when you are both target and witness. It sped and dragged as if a clock and a rubber band had decided to marry. In the kitchen, someone abandoned a tray of leftover cupcakes from a product launch no one had the heart to celebrate, and I ate one like an apology I didn't owe anyone. In a one-on-one, a junior PM asked if I was okay, eyes big with the sincerity of someone not yet punished for it, and I told her the truest version that fit in a minute. I'm steady, I'm tired, and I'm letting the process work. She nodded as if I'd given her a script she might need someday. Before I left, I reviewed the calendar invite for the postponed vendor signing and saw the word tentative stamped across it like a scar that had learned to protect instead of conceal. I closed my laptop to the sight of my own desktop photo, sun on a cheap lake from a vacation we once called restorative, and picked up my bag feeling like a person rather than a quite capable ghost. Outside, the early evening had taken on that pale gold that forgives cities their sharp corners. I walked home instead of summoning a car, letting the rhythm of my steps reorganize the static in my head into something like music. At home, I did the things that make rooms remember you. Opened windows an inch, watered a stubborn plant, set my keys in the dish with an audible certainty. I didn't check his feeds or the gossip channels or the private slacks where hilarity wears its nice shoes. I opened a book and let a paragraph keep me in one place long enough to feel the chair support my weight. When my phone buzzed at 11:58 p.m., it felt like a memory shaking off its dust. The subject line landed like a rehearsal trying to be rescue. Please meet, I can explain. The sender was him, the tone borrowed from 100 PR apologies I've dissected at work, and attached was a single photo that should have been nothing. Our kitchen last night. The frame was careful, the fruit bowl, the faucet gleam, the edge of the notebook where I had once written cilantro and policy side by side. No faces, no words. But in the reflection on the oven door, if you widen the image and brighten the shadows, there was the faint impression of a person holding a phone at chest level, and the outline was not his. The metadata timestamp matched a minute I had been in bed, convinced the house was empty of everything but my breath. My kitchen had been photographed after midnight, and the photo came from his account. I chose the last word, not a scream, a summary. We met at a public cafe because privacy had been repurposed all month into a forge for lies. I picked a table under a skylight where the ceiling insisted on daylight and the floor plan insisted on witnesses. Before he could arrange his face into sorrow, I set the ground rules the way you pin a map to a wall. No blame games, only facts. I would ask questions that could be answered with dates, policies, and yes or no. If his answers blurred, the meeting would end. He reached for charm as if it were a handle. I slid the photo of our kitchen back across the table and asked what time he took it and why someone else's reflection existed in the oven door after midnight. He glanced at the image like a man trying to read through glass. "It's not what you think," he said, the prayer of people who prefer fog. "Then it will survive clarity," I replied, and waited. He admitted the alias, boss, and the wine bar in the tone of a person confessing to a parking ticket. He called it mentoring, then not serious, then a lapse. checking synonyms the way you test doorknobs in a hallway of exits. I kept my voice inside the lines and asked which line of the vendor policy he believed allowed a personal relationship during active negotiation, which clause permitted a Shell LLC tied to his friend to house the apartment he frequented on Fridays, and which statute of common sense endorsed coaching a vendor rep in my dining room while archiving her airdrops from our hallway. He tried to pivot to feelings, said he'd been lonely inside the treadmill of the road show, said I'd been distant, said the word partner like an audition. This is policy, I said, not unkindly. We can talk about lonely when the audit is over. The justice payoff did not arrive with symbols, just emails that understood the burden of nouns. The company opened a formal inquiry beyond the initial review. Procurement reassigned the vendor contract to a manager with no social overlap. Legal paused the renewal timeline. HR placed him on paid leave pending findings, and the account team moved EK to a different client with a note about conflicts. My deck became a file number, then a case name, then a process with milestones instead of rumors. When he texted that the board would understand eventually, I didn't respond. When Jenna sent a paragraph that used the word blindsided twice and the word sorry once, I filed it under weather. I moved into an apartment where the morning knocks gently on the windows instead of craning its neck through blinds, where the refrigerator hum is a kind of reassurance rather than a metronome for whispers. I bought a rug that doesn't match any memory and a lamp that makes the evening honest. The live photos went into a vault, at first in case anyone tried to rewrite the month into something it never was, and then for a different purpose altogether. Less as evidence, more as a syllabus on self-respect. I created a folder called Boundaries and dropped into it not only the clips and receipts, but the one-page policy audit we greenlit, the checklist procurement adopted, and a screenshot of the all-hands slide where trust and transparency looked like typography until the room heard a whisper and remembered the difference. Sometimes proof is what you keep to feel safe. Sometimes it becomes the curriculum for a future you who refuses to be taught to doubt her own hearing. He asked to see me again, to talk like adults, which is always code for please tidy the mess I made. I told him that adults write things down. If he had something to say, he could send it to counsel or HR. I met with my lawyer on a Tuesday in a room that smelled faintly of toner and peppermint tea, and we drafted the clean end I'd promised myself, property division that didn't turn love into loot, a communication protocol that positioned the process between us like a guardrail, and a single-page addendum barring either party from using private spaces for business without consent. When he suggested a joint statement for optics, I sent him the same sentence he'd heard at the microphone. Transparency belongs in public. If he wanted redemption, he could practice it where policies live. I kept the bracelet in a drawer for one more week, then mailed it to myself at the new address, with no return name, a private ritual to remind my hands who they answer to. When it arrived, I opened the padded envelope carefully, lifted the chain with 2 fingers, and felt nothing. Not rage, not grief, just air where performance used to be. I took a photo of it lying on craft paper and filed the image under items that no longer hold me. Then I made dinner in a kitchen that hadn't been a corridor for anyone else's narrative, set the plate on a table that owed nothing to a corner booth, and let silence be evidence of its own. If you've ever been asked to swallow a truth that won't pass, you know the sensation of choosing your own throat over someone else's comfort. I chose the last word, and it wasn't clever. It was clear. If you were me, where would you draw the line? In the kitchen with a whisper still under the frame, or on a stage with a microphone and policy beside you? Would you leave quietly, or would you choose a summary that other women could use as a map? I washed the dishes and let the night fit into the apartment like it had been measured for it. The phone on the counter lit without buzzing. Voicemail, unknown number. No transcription, just the old red dot and the invitation to press play. I tapped the screen, held the speaker near the light, and listened to a stranger's voice settle into my clean room like a draft from a door I hadn't known was open. Check your photos. There's one more leave. If this story hit a nerve, tell me in the comments. Where would you draw the line, in a private kitchen or on a public mic? Share this video with someone who needs a little proof and a lot of clarity, and subscribe for part 2 when I open the One More Live. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the follow-up and the practical policy checklist you can actually use. If you made it this far, Type live photo in the comments so I know you're part of the investigation.